A warm welcome to all my dear children. Today we are going to analyze a story, A Letter to God. It is a chapter from the textbook First Flight, prescribed for class 10. This story is the first lesson of the book. So here we begin with the analysis of A Letter to God by G.L. Fuentes. Before we begin, let's know a little about the author. Gregorio Fuentes was born on July 11, 1897, on Lanzarote in the Canary Islands. He worked as a fisherman in a boat belonging to Ernest Hemingway, an American writer. At the age of 10, he worked on the cargo ships to and fro to Canary Island. Fuentes is credited as a model for Hemingway's finest novel, The Old Man and the Sea, published in 1952. He died at the ripe old age of 104 in the year 2002 due to cancer. Now here's a little background of the story. A Letter to God revolves around the idea of having unquestionable belief in something. The story is set in a Latin American country and is about a simple innocent farmer who turns to the Almighty for monetary help. Lencho, the farmer, who is the protagonist of the story, turns to God after discovering his entire crop yield destroyed by a devastating hailstorm. Though his wish gets fulfilled, he displays lack of gratitude and blames the postmaster and his men for stealing a part of the money. The story has a very powerful theme. It highlights the immense power in man's innocent faith in God. It teaches us that if man has childlike faith in God, he can accomplish anything considered impossible. If, with this faith, man asks God for help, God responds, though through his own peculiar channels, and fulfills man's any urgent, legitimate desire. So, children, we see 5 very strong core values shining through the chapter. That is faith, compassion, hard work, generosity, and innocence. Now let's discuss the central characters of the story. There are 2 central characters in the story, Lencho and the postmaster. Lencho was the sole breadwinner of the family and lived on the crest of a low hill in the valley. He was deeply religious and was committed to his family and farming. On the other hand, the postmaster was amiable, benevolent, compassionate, and God-fearing. Initially, he laughed at the letter written by Lencho, but later was touched by its content. Now let's hear and see what qualities are attributed to Lencho and postmaster. Lencho on one hand was naive, religious, committed, hardworking, innocent, and gullible. Postmaster was genuine, amiable, inquisitive, generous, compassionate, benevolent, and God-fearing. So what makes us say that Lencho was naive, religious, and committed? Well, Lencho was naive as he allowed himself to believe that God would be capable of collecting the money and handing it to him just by asking. Lencho was committed because he was like an ox of a man and worked in the fields like an animal, as he was the sole breadwinner. He was deeply religious because he truly believed that God could help him, going as far as writing a letter to God and attempting to mail it shows how much faith he had. The postmaster was genuine, charitable, compassionate, and inquisitive. But how? Well, he was a genuine person because he went out of his way to do an act of grace for a stranger he had not known. He was charitable because when he received the letter, he not only offered to pay but also asked his fellow officials to contribute. He was inquisitive as he was keen to know the contents of the letter. So, in short, the postmaster was certainly kind and compassionate and displayed open heartedness and generosity of spirit and resolved to keep Lencho's faith in God intact. Now for the summary. By now you all must have had a fair idea of the story. Well, the story begins with a farmer named Lencho waiting for a rain shower to nourish his field of corn. He is confident that his harvest is going to yield him huge profits, just like it does every year. To his utmost excitement, it does rain. But soon it turns into a hailstorm, destroying his entire crop field. The damage poses a threat to his family's survival, as their entire livelihood was dependent on the year's produce. Lencho, despite having worked day and night at the field, knew how to write and thus decides to write a letter to God explaining his situation and asking for help, and posts his letter addressed to God. The postmaster notices the letter and is first amused, but then vows to do something for the farmer so as to keep his immense belief intact. He contributes from his salary and collects money from his colleagues and friends who willingly contribute for an act of charity. To his dismay, he can only collect 70 pesos, which he wraps in an envelope to make it seem like a reply from the deity. On finding the letter, Lencho is not at all shocked, but instead gets angry on finding that the amount is less than what he had expected. He again writes a letter to God, conveying his disappointment and distrust in the employees of the post office who he thought had stolen the remaining amount. Now let us see the key points of the story. To begin with, Lencho was a farmer. His house was the only house in the valley on top of a hill. Lencho's field needed rain for a good harvest. He looked expectantly at the sky and it did rain at last. The drops of rain were like coins for him. But his happiness was short-lived as very large hailstones began to fall after the rain. The hailstones destroyed all leaves on trees, plants and flowers. There would be no crop that year. There was only a single hope, God. He wrote a letter to God the following Sunday. He needed 100 pesos to sow his field again and to live until the new crop came. So Lencho wrote to God on an envelope and put it in the mailbox. The postmaster, on seeing this, laughed heartily and mocked at him. However, the postmaster reread the letter that showed faith in God and decided to help Lencho. He collected 70 pesos only from the employees and contributed a part of his own salary. The letter reached Lencho with signature of God in it with money. However, Lencho's happiness turned into anger on seeing there were 30 pesos short of the money. So, he wrote another letter to God, reminding him that he had received 70 pesos sent by him. He asked God not to send the rest of the 30 pesos through mail as the post office employees were a bunch of crooks. So, I hope you all enjoyed the very interesting and inspirational story. So now children, let's just go through the question answers and see whether you're able to answer all of them. But before you attempt the questions, remember a few points. First thing, read the question carefully. Secondly, find out which tense the question is written in. And thirdly, stick to the word limit and write to the point and in correct sequence. So let's begin. Question number 1. What did Lencho hope for? Why did Lencho say the raindrops were like new coins? How did the rain change? What happened to Lencho's fields? Who or what did Lencho have faith in? What did he do? Who read the letter? What did the postmaster do then? Was Lencho surprised to find a letter for him with money in it? What made him angry? These are a few questions which will help you to understand and analyze the story. Now, as we all know, we do have long answer questions also called extrapolatory. So here are a few examples. When you attempt an extrapolatory question, again, read it carefully, right to the point, and sometimes the question can be framed in many ways, though the answer may be the same. So read it carefully and try to understand what the question is asking you. Question number 1. Give a character sketch of Lencho. How did the hailstones affect Lencho's field? What was Lencho's only hope? Justify the title. Lencho had unshakable faith in God, but no faith in humanity. Elucidate. Do you think his reaction towards the postmaster was justified? Hope you enjoyed the tremendously inspirational story, as it not only ignites the power of hope but also reinforces belief in humanity. Remember, faith is not believing that God can, it is knowing that God will. Thank you and have a wonderful day ahead.